We originally started this study because we were interested in how young children learn how to use tools. The particular tool we focused on was actually hammering, and we wanted to see if there are some precursors that we can find. The reason why we chose hammering is because if you look through human evolution, what you see is that for almost 2 million years, human tool use almost exclusively existed of percussive types of tool use. So using a hammer stone to open nuts, to flake some stones later on for sort of cutting surfaces. But the majority of the tool use really was sort of this percussive up and down type tool use, very similar to modern day hammering. And so we looked at children and what they do. And what we find is that in children, young children, when they sort of are around 6 months of age until about 14 months of age, whenever they get their hands on something, they just start banging it on any surface that's in their surroundings. And so what we actually wanted to see is how does that actual behavior change over time. And so we followed young infants from the age of 6 months till about 15 months when they usually stop doing this sort of behavior. And we actually recorded their movements using the same technology that video game developers or a lot of animated movies use to track movements. And we're particularly interested in sort of what the end effector, so the hand in this case that's holding the object, what that hand is doing. And so one thing about humans is that whenever we do a behavior over and over and over again, we usually become more and more efficient at it the more often we do it. And so if you look at banging, what actually happens is that as children get older, they also become a lot more efficient at the way they bang those objects. But there's something very interesting that happens when you look at efficient banging. And what that is that the way to be efficient in banging is also very useful when you're trying to aim at something. The young infants at 6 months are usually very inefficient. They will move their hands left and right and forward and God knows all over the place. But it's a very inefficient way to move, whereas the older infants are actually very efficient. So you only see upwards and downwards movement. So the hand stays over the exact same area all the time, despite the fact that there's no target, there's nothing that they're actually aiming at. It already looks like they're aiming at something, just because they became a lot more efficient. The other thing is that it's much harder to move your arm from the shoulder. It's a much bigger muscle, so it takes a lot more energy to move your arm that way, whereas the older children becoming more efficient usually involves a lot more elbow and wrist use. The nice thing is that the human wrist is sort of unique in its propensity and ability to move in a very flexible way, whereas a lot of other primates have wrists that are very stiff. You can't really use them very well for things like tool use. The human wrist can move in a lot of ways, and due to our actually sort of thick opposable thumb and the way it's positioned, also allows you to grip things very firmly. And so what happens is the other way in that children become more efficient is that the way that they bang shifts sort of from like a torso and shoulder movement to one of the elbow and the wrist as they get older and older. And so that also helps in actually controlling the movements in a much finer degree than trying to move from the elbow and the shoulder. And so what we essentially found is that just by practicing over and over through the second half year of life, these young infants are actually changing the way that they do bang to really make it very useful for something that's a purposeful behavior like hammering later on.